Cheyenne is doing her best. Excuse me. Sorry.
Another personal tragedy for actor Marlon Brando. His 25-year-old daughter, Cheyenne, has committed suicide at her home in Tahiti. Cheyenne Brando reportedly had made several suicide attempts before hanging herself yesterday.
In 2021, Hollywood's golden image cracked. A deathbed confession exposed one of its biggest stars as a predator. Another legend's private diaries revealed mob connections that went deeper than anyone imagined. From addiction-fueled violence to calculated abuse of power, these weren't just difficult celebrities. They were something far more sinister. Here's the true story of how some of cinema's most beloved faces hid the darkest souls. James Dean. James Dean was a star who became famous for his rebellious roles and striking looks. He seemed cool and confident on screen, but in real life, things were very different. When he worked on Rebel Without a Cause in 1955, he was hard to handle. He showed up late to the set and sometimes was still drunk from the night before. One day, he didn't like a line in the script and refused to come out of his trailer. The delay cost the studio a lot of money and upset his co-stars. People started seeing him as difficult and unreliable. Dean's personal life was also messy. He had a relationship with Rogers Brackett, a man who helped him get his career started. Dean sometimes threatened to tell people about their relationship unless Brackett kept supporting him. He would act friendly to people when he needed something but could turn mean if he didn't get his way. During the filming of Giant, things got worse. He became jealous of Elizabeth Taylor's friendship with their co-star Rock Hudson. In one scene, he mumbled his lines and wouldn't look at anyone, ruining the take. The director, George Stevens, thought about replacing him, but the studio stopped him because Dean was too popular. Everyone on set felt drained by his mood swings and demands. Off the set, Dean was reckless. He loved street racing and didn't care about safety. Just a week before his death, he was speeding through Los Angeles and almost hit a school bus. The studio covered it up, but it showed how dangerous his behavior was. Dean died in a car crash on September 30th, 1955, when he was only 24 years old. His death made him an icon, and Hollywood worked to make him seem like a misunderstood rebel. But behind the image was a troubled person whose actions hurt the people around him. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford, on the other hand, was a Hollywood legend with a dark side. The most shocking stories about her came from her adopted daughter, Christina, who wrote a book called Mommy Dearest in 1978. Christina said Crawford was obsessed with keeping everything perfect. If something was out of place, she would punish her children. In one famous story, Crawford got angry because Christina's clothes were hung on wire hangers instead of wooden ones. This led to a terrifying outburst. Christina also said that Crawford would wake her and her siblings up at night to clean the house. One night, when Christina was 9, Crawford made her scrub a bathroom floor for hours because of a water spot. Her hands were raw and bleeding by the end. Crawford was just as controlling on movie sets. During Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, she had a feud with Bette Davis. In one scene, Davis had to drag Crawford, but Crawford made it harder by secretly putting weights in her pockets. This hurt Davis's back and showed how far Crawford would go to win. Crawford's need for control also showed in her marriages. When her husband, Alfred Steele, died, she took over his job at Pepsi and made sure no one could challenge her authority. She used her fame to intimidate people and stay in power. Even after her death, disturbing stories kept coming out. In 2017, her grandson said that Crawford's daughter Kathy had destroyed a tape that could have ruined Crawford's reputation. While not everything about her life is clear, the stories of fear and control paint a troubling picture. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis made the world laugh with his comedy and was admired for his charity work, but his life behind the scenes was full of sadness and conflict. One of the most painful parts of his story was his troubled relationship with his youngest son, Joseph. At first, they were close. Joseph loved the arts, just like his dad, and people said he looked a lot like him. But everything changed in 1989 when Joseph, at 25, gave an interview that shocked everyone. Joseph told the National Enquirer that his father was abusive. He said growing up with Jerry was pure hell, and accused him of beating his children. Joseph even questioned if his father had ever really loved him. These words deeply hurt Jerry, who saw it as a betrayal. He immediately cut Joseph out of his life, refusing to speak to him again. This rejection set Joseph on a path of hardship and sadness. He battled addiction and mental health problems, lost his home, and eventually lived in a church in Los Angeles. Despite his pain, he tried to reconnect with his father. He sent letters to Jerry's famous telethon, hoping for a response. But each letter came back unopened. It was clear Jerry wanted nothing to do with him. On October 24, 2009, Joseph died alone from a morphine overdose. He was only 45. Even in death, Jerry didn't soften. According to Joseph's ex-wife, Jerry refused to help pay for his funeral. Joseph's older brother, Gary, blamed their father for Joseph's struggles, saying that if Jerry hadn't rejected him, Joseph might have had a chance at a better life. When Jerry talked about Joseph's death in a 2014 interview, his words were cold and distant. He showed no sign of regret or sadness. Jerry's anger towards his sons didn't end there. When he died in 2017, he left all 6 sons from his first marriage out of his will, including Joseph. None of them inherited a penny from his $50 million fortune. Jerry's life is remembered for both his incredible talent and the pain he caused his own family. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Her violet eyes and beauty made her unforgettable, but her personal life was just as dramatic as her movies. She had a reputation for falling in love with married men, and her love life was always in the spotlight. One of the most shocking stories from her life involved her best friend, Debbie Reynolds. In 1958, Elizabeth's husband, Mike Todd, died in a plane crash. She was heartbroken. Eddie Fisher, Mike's best friend and Debbie's husband, tried to comfort her. But their friendship quickly turned into an affair. Debbie and Elizabeth had been friends since they were teenagers at MGM Studios, so this betrayal hurt deeply. Debbie found out about the affair when she called Elizabeth's hotel room pretending to be Dean Martin. Eddie Fisher answered the phone. The story became a huge scandal. The press called Elizabeth a homewrecker, and Eddie was seen as a cheater. Elizabeth didn't seem to care about the backlash. When asked what Mike Todd would think of her actions, she said, "Mike's dead and I'm alive." She also added, "What do you expect me to do? Sleep alone?" People were shocked by her comments, and it made her seem heartless. Even the Vatican called her out, accusing her of erotic vagrancy. The scandal ruined Eddie Fisher's career, but Elizabeth's fame only grew. Elizabeth's next affair was just as shocking. While married to Eddie, she fell in love with Richard Burton, her co-star in Cleopatra. Both of them were married at the time, but their relationship couldn't stay a secret. A photo of them kissing on a yacht became front-page news. Their affair was so big that it even pushed stories about space exploration out of the headlines. This was also the start of modern paparazzi culture, as photographers fought to capture every moment of their relationship. Some people in Congress even wanted to ban Elizabeth and Richard from entering the U.S. because of the scandal. Elizabeth's love life stayed wild throughout her life. She married 8 times to 7 men and earned the nickname Hollywood's husband hunter. Her marriages were full of drama, often ending because of infidelity. But Elizabeth never apologized for the way she lived. She once joked, "I'm a very committed wife, and I should be committed too, for being married so many times." Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was one of the greatest actors of all time, but his life off-screen was filled with darkness and pain. His fame hid a lot of troubling stories about his relationships, actions, and personal tragedies. Brando had a long relationship with Rita Moreno, which started when she was 22. At first, it seemed passionate, but it turned into a lot of heartbreak for her. Brando kept cheating on her, and it made her feel miserable. One time, in 1961, she found out he was seeing another actress. She was so hurt that she tried to end her life by taking sleeping pills at his house. Luckily, his assistant found her and rushed her to the hospital. This happened just before she started working on West Side Story, which won her an Oscar. There were more terrible moments. In 1956, Moreno became pregnant with Brando's child. Instead of being supportive, he forced her to have an illegal abortion. After it went badly, she needed emergency surgery, but Brando didn't show any kindness. Instead, he got angry about the situation. Rita later said Brando wasn't a real love in her life, just someone she couldn't stop being drawn to. In 1972, Brando caused another scandal with the movie Last Tango in Paris. In one scene, his character attacks a young woman, played by Maria Schneider. Brando and the director, Bernardo Bertolucci, added the scene without telling Schneider beforehand. She was only 19, and later said the experience made her feel deeply humiliated. Brando, who was much older, admitted the situation was wrong, but the damage was already done. Schneider struggled for years afterward with addiction and sadness. Brando's family life was just as heartbreaking. In 1990, his son Christian shot and killed a man named Dag Drolet, who was dating Brando's daughter, Cheyenne. Christian said he was protecting Cheyenne, who was pregnant, and said Drolet had hurt her. The shooting happened after Christian had been drinking, and Brando's home became the center of this tragedy. Christian went to prison, but had a tough life even after he got out. He died in 2008 from pneumonia. Cheyenne also suffered a lot. After the shooting, her mental health got worse, and in 1995, she ended her life. She was only 25 and left behind a young son. Brando blamed himself for the pain in his children's lives. In his later years, he lived quietly, feeling regret for everything that went wrong. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was another famous actor with a darker side to his story. In 2021, after he passed away, a shocking truth came out. Lana Wood, the sister of actress Natalie Wood, said that Douglas hurt Natalie when she was just 16. Their mother had arranged for Natalie to meet him, thinking it would help her career. But instead, Natalie came back upset and scared. Years later, she told her sister that Douglas had assaulted her. This wasn't the only troubling story about Douglas. People said he used his fame and power to control young actresses. In his own book, he even wrote about disturbing things he had done to women. Many in Hollywood at that time got away with this kind of behavior because they were powerful, and no one wanted to speak up. Even after Douglas died, these stories made people question how much of his legacy was truly good. Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was loved by millions and called America's Dad because of his role on The Cosby Show. He seemed like the perfect family man, but everything changed when over 60 women accused him of sexual assault. These shocking allegations spanned over 40 years, from 1965 to 2008, and happened in many places across the US and Canada. The women said Cosby had a pattern. He would act as a mentor, especially to young women who wanted to be actresses. He'd gain their trust and then drug and assault them. People trusted him because of his fame and fatherly image, and that helped him avoid consequences for a long time. In 2005, Cosby admitted in a deposition that he got quaaludes to give to women for physical relationship. This showed how calculated his actions were. One of his most well-known accusers was Andrea Constand. She worked at Temple University and said Cosby drugged and assaulted her in 2004. Her case led to Cosby being convicted in 2018 for aggravated indecent assault. But in 2021, his conviction was overturned on a legal technicality, and he was released. Even after all this, Cosby has never shown any remorse. He still claims he is innocent, which has hurt his victims even more. The accusations came from women of all ages and backgrounds. For example, model Janice Dickinson said Cosby drugged and raped her in 1982. Lawyer Tamara Green said he assaulted her in the 1970s. Many of the stories were so similar that it became impossible to believe his denials. What made it worse was how Cosby used his public image as a moral guide to hide what he was doing. In the 80s and 90s, he often criticized the black community, lecturing them about morals. This hypocrisy made the truth about him even harder to accept. In 2015, a judge unsealed his 2005 deposition, where he admitted to some of his actions because the judge believed the public needed to know. His accusers' bravery in speaking out, even after decades, made people rethink why victims sometimes stay silent for so long. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball was a legendary comedian who broke barriers for women in Hollywood. But behind the scenes, she was very demanding. She wanted everything to be perfect, and this sometimes made her difficult to work with. People admired her talent and work ethic, but her sharp criticism could hurt those around her. Gail Gordon, who worked with her, said she expected everyone to work as hard as she did. On the set of I Love Lucy, Ball wanted control over everything. Once, the director, William Asher, came back from a break to find her giving instructions to the crew. When he reminded her that he was the director, she told him, "Not anymore, Buster." This kind of behavior often caused tension. Vivian Vance, who played Ethel Mertz, was a frequent target of Ball's harsh comments about her weight and appearance. These comments affected Vance's mental health over the years. Even Ball's husband, Desi Arnaz, wasn't spared. Some reports claim she could be physically aggressive toward him, with stories of her kicking him on set. Their relationship, both personal and professional, was full of ups and downs, adding pressure to their lives. Ball's need for perfection extended to everything, even physical comedy. During the famous grape-stomping scene in Lucy's Italian movie, she ended up in a real fight with her co-star Teresa Torelli. Torelli started choking her during filming, and the director thought it was just acting at first. Despite all this, Ball's accomplishments were groundbreaking. After divorcing Arnaz, she became the first woman to run a major TV production company, Desilu Productions. Under her leadership, the studio created famous shows like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Bette Davis. Bette Davis was one of Hollywood's most famous actresses, known for her sharp eyes and powerful presence. But her life off-screen was full of drama, too. She was fearless and sometimes ruthless, both in her career and personal life. One of the most talked-about moments of her career was her feud with Joan Crawford. This rivalry exploded while they were filming Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. The tension between them wasn't just about words. It got physical. During one scene, Davis was supposed to drag Crawford across the floor, but instead, she kicked her in the head. Crawford needed stitches because of it. Crawford didn't take it lightly. She secretly wore a weightlifter's belt under her costume to make herself heavier, knowing Davis had back problems. This forced Davis to strain herself repeatedly during the scenes, causing her real pain. Even after the movie, their rivalry didn't cool down. When Davis was nominated for an Oscar for her performance, Crawford found a way to steal the spotlight. She contacted the other nominees and offered to accept the award on their behalf if they couldn't attend. When Anne Bancroft won and didn't show up, Crawford walked onto the stage to accept the award. This move humiliated Davis in front of everyone watching. The drama in Davis's life didn't stop with her co-stars. Her own daughter, B.D. Hyman, shocked everyone in 1985 with a book about her mother called My Mother's Keeper. In the book, she described Davis as a cruel and controlling parent. She claimed that Davis would pretend to attempt suicide just to punish her children, and even took her out of school at age 11 to work as her assistant. Hyman also wrote that Davis drank heavily and would become violent when drunk. There were stories of fights between Davis and her stepfather, Gary Merrill, adding to the chaotic picture of their home life. Davis responded to the book by cutting her daughter out of her will and publicly disowning her. She even wrote an open letter accusing Hyman of being ungrateful for the privileged life she had. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy, on the other hand, seemed like the perfect leading man on screen. But his life behind the scenes was much darker. Tracy stayed married to his wife, Louise Treadwell, but their relationship was cold and distant. He had many affairs during their marriage, including with actresses Loretta Young and Katharine Hepburn. His romance with Young during the filming of Man's Castle in 1933 was passionate but messy. Young said Tracy's drinking often made him unpredictable. She described him as either angry or overly emotional when drunk. His relationship with Hepburn was even more famous, lasting 26 years. But it was far from a fairy tale. Tracy felt guilty about leaving his wife because of his Catholic beliefs. He also blamed himself for his son's deafness, thinking it was punishment for his own sins. This guilt kept him from ever divorcing, and Hepburn spent her life waiting in the shadows. Some reports even claimed that Tracy physically hurt Hepburn during their time together, but she stayed devoted to him. She often saw herself as his caretaker, even sleeping outside his hotel room when he locked himself inside during drinking binges. Tracy's difficulties weren't limited to relationships. He was also hard to work with on film sets. While filming Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1941, he demanded to play both roles, even though this meant his co-star, Ingrid Bergman, lost the chance to take on the transformation herself. He had a reputation for being demanding, but his talent kept him at the top. Behind the scenes, Tracy battled severe alcoholism and depression. He often disappeared for days during drinking binges, leaving his friends and colleagues to cover for him. Despite his charm and success, he once admitted he wasn't good at life. When asked what he struggled with, he simply said, "Life." Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was a famous actor known for his adventure roles in the 1930s and 1940s. People loved his charm and daring image, but his real life was much darker. Behind the scenes, Flynn targeted young women, some of them underage. In 1942, 2 teenage girls accused him of assault. Betty Hansen was 17, and Peggy Satterley was 16. Betty said it happened at a party in Bel Air. Peggy said it happened twice on a yachting trip to Catalina Island. The trial started in January 1943, and it became a huge scandal. Newspapers wrote about every detail. Flynn's lawyer, Jerry Giesler, attacked the girls in court. He called them liars and claimed they wanted money from Flynn. People learned that Flynn used secret nicknames for underage girls. He called Peggy JB for jailbait and SQQ for San Quentin Quail. It showed he knew their ages and the risk of being caught. Stories also came out about Flynn's time in Papua New Guinea, where he had similar behavior with young girls. Despite all this, Flynn was found not guilty in February 1943. The jury, mostly women, seemed more impressed by Flynn's looks and fame than the evidence. After the trial, the phrase "in like Flynn" became popular. It joked about how easily he got away with things. Flynn's career didn't suffer much. He kept making movies, and audiences ignored the scandal. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was loved for his smooth voice and charm, but his life had a darker side. He had close ties to the mafia. In 1947, he was photographed with the mob boss Lucky Luciano in Havana. Sinatra gave Luciano a gold cigarette case with an engraving that called him a dear pal. This meeting wasn't random. Sinatra was there with other crime bosses like Santo Traficante Jr. and Carlos Marcello. The FBI tracked Sinatra for over 40 years because of his mob connections. They even described him as someone with a hoodlum complex. Sinatra was especially close to Sam Giancana, a powerful mob boss from Chicago. Giancana wore a ring that Sinatra gave him as a gift. Sinatra even sang songs to honor him during performances, like My Kind of Town. Their friendship wasn't just personal. In 1960, Sinatra helped connect Giancana with John F. Kennedy's campaign to get mob support for votes. Sinatra's mafia ties sometimes put him in danger. In the 1970s, mob boss Fat Tony Salerno called Sinatra to a secret meeting. Sinatra reportedly begged for his life after the Genovese family put a hit on him. Despite these risks, Sinatra's connections gave him power. When his relationship with the Kennedys ended, Sinatra became close to President Richard Nixon. He even got a Secret Service code name, Napoleon. These connections helped protect his image, even as people questioned his ties to crime. Sinatra used his fame to silence critics. Many people were too afraid to speak out because of his influence. Even law enforcement seemed to look the other way. Fans saw him as a legendary entertainer, but behind the scenes, he lived a double life. He was a star, but he was also connected to a world of crime and corruption. Orson Welles. Orson Welles was a brilliant filmmaker, famous for creating Citizen Kane, but he had a dark and destructive side that often overshadowed his talent. On September 30th, 1941, during a meeting with RKO Pictures, Welles became furious when they suggested changes to his film The Magnificent Ambersons. In anger, he threw a chair across the room, almost hitting the studio head. This incident was the beginning of his rocky relationship with Hollywood. Welles often hurt others with his sharp wit. On March 15, 1944, while filming Jane Eyre, he insulted his co-star, Joan Fontaine's acting in front of the crew. His harsh words made her cry, and she later called it the most humiliating moment of her career. This was not an isolated event. Welles regularly belittled his collaborators, creating a toxic environment. One of the worst examples happened on July 7, 1948, during a live radio broadcast. A young actor asked for advice, and Welles mocked his appearance and voice, saying he should work cleaning toilets instead of acting. The young man was so devastated that he gave up on his acting dreams. As Welles became more unpredictable, Hollywood began to distance itself from him. By the 1970s, he was forced to appear in commercials and low-budget films to fund his projects. His final interview on October 10, 1985, was on The Merv Griffin Show. He rambled about his past triumphs and angrily attacked people he believed had wronged him in Hollywood. Just hours later, he died alone at home, with heavy drinking marking his last moments. His personal life was equally troubled. He married 3 times, but each marriage ended because of infidelity and emotional abuse. His daughter, Rebecca, revealed he only contacted her when he needed money, showing how he often used people and left them behind. In his later years, Wells became extremely isolated. He lived in a small, cluttered home filled with unfinished scripts and remnants of meals. Visitors often experienced his temper, as he would throw objects and lash out at anyone who disagreed with him. On April 15, 1982, at the Cannes Film Festival, he physically attacked a photographer who tried to take his picture. His paranoia and volatility were clear signs of his decline. Wells died on October 10, 1985, remembered as a cinematic genius, but also as a deeply troubled man whose self-destructive tendencies ruined many of his relationships and opportunities. W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields was a famous comedian known for playing a grumpy, drunk character. What many didn't realize was how close that on-screen persona was to his real personality. While audiences loved his humor, those who worked with him often found him cruel and unsettling. His treatment of child actors was especially troubling. On July 15, 1934, during the filming of The Old-Fashioned Way, Fields became frustrated with 2-year-old baby Leroy. To retaliate, he spiked the child's milk bottle with gin. When the toddler became drunk, production had to stop. This wasn't the only time Fields acted this way. He was known to pinch, trip, and yell at child actors, leaving them in tears during filming. One of the worst incidents happened on September 3, 1938, during the filming of You Can't Cheat an Honest Man. Fields, drunk as usual, taunted his 10-year-old co-star Gloria Jean by calling her stupid and talentless. He even threatened to throw her off the set. Gloria was so upset that she refused to work with him again. Fields' bad behavior extended to adults as well. On December 12, 1940, while filming The Bank Dick, a young assistant accidentally bumped into him. Fields reacted violently, punching the man and breaking his nose. The studio covered up the incident, but it left a lasting impression on those who saw it. Fields' personal life was also chaotic. He married Harriet Hughes in 1900, but their marriage was full of fights and abuse. On March 7, 1907, Hughes reported that Fields had beaten her after a night of drinking. Although charges were never filed, the incident added to his reputation as a dangerous and volatile man. Fields' drinking was legendary. He reportedly drank up to 2 quarts of gin daily, starting early in the morning. On October 23, 1945, during a live radio broadcast, he arrived so drunk he couldn't perform. He insulted the cast and used such offensive language that the broadcast was cut short, effectively ending his radio career. Fields' cruelty even extended to animals. On June 18, 1933, during a publicity event for International House, he was photographed kicking a small dog that wandered onto the set. When questioned, he laughed and said he hated dogs as much as children. This shocking attitude was a recurring theme in his life. In his later years, Fields became increasingly erratic and reclusive. He spent most of his time drinking and rarely left his home. On December 2, 1946, he was arrested for public intoxication after being found wandering the streets, shouting obscenities. It was a sad end to a life full of excess and cruelty.